My name is Madison Brooks, and 3 months ago I discovered that my entire family had been systematically stealing from me for over a decade. Not just money, my inheritance, my business ideas, even the house I thought belonged to my late grandmother. The worst part, they had been planning to completely cut me out of the family fortune while I was caring for our dying father. When I confronted them at the family meeting last Tuesday, my older brother looked me dead in the eye and said those words that still haunt me: "You don't belong here anymore, Madison. You never did." But here's what they didn't know about their sweet, naive little sister. I had been recording everything. Before we dive into how I completely destroyed their perfect little scam and built something they could never touch, I want to know, where are you watching from? Are you Team Family Loyalty or Team Justice? Hit that like button if you think blood doesn't excuse betrayal, and subscribe, because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why sometimes the best family is the one you choose yourself. Growing up in the Brooks family meant understanding hierarchy. My father, William Brooks, built a successful construction company from nothing, and my mother, Patricia, managed the family finances with an iron fist. My older brother, Derek, was the golden child, Harvard MBA, married to the right woman, destined to take over the business. My sister, Vanessa, played the perfect daughter role, always agreeing with mom and dad, never questioning anything. Then there was me, the creative one, the dreamer, the one who asked too many questions. I had always felt like an outsider, but I attributed it to being different. While Derek focused on business and Vanessa pursued her law degree, I went to art school and started a small graphic design company. My family tolerated my choices but never celebrated them. I thought it was just typical family dynamics until Dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer hit him hard and fast. During his final months, I became his primary caregiver. Mom claimed she was too emotional to handle it. Derek was busy with the business and Vanessa had her law practice. So I moved back into the family home, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, spending 18-hour days making sure Dad was comfortable. It was during one of those long nights when Dad was heavily medicated and sleeping that I decided to organize his home office. The man was meticulous about record keeping, but months of illness had left papers scattered everywhere. I wanted to create a system that would help Mom manage things after he was gone. That's when I found the first discrepancy: a bank statement from an account I didn't recognize with my grandmother's name on it. Grandma Rose had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving what I thought was a modest inheritance that helped pay for her funeral expenses. But this statement showed regular transfers of significant amounts that definitely hadn't been used for funeral costs. My hands shook as I dug deeper into the files. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Grandma Rose hadn't left a modest inheritance. She had left over $800,000, plus the family lake house that had been in our family for 3 generations. According to the will I found buried in Dad's filing cabinet, everything was supposed to be split equally among her 3 grandchildren, Derek, Vanessa, and me. But the bank records told a different story. Derek and Vanessa had been receiving monthly payments from the inheritance trust for 5 years. I had received nothing. I spent the next 3 days going through every document in that office while Dad slept. What I uncovered was a conspiracy that went back over a decade. When I was 22 and struggling to get my design business off the ground, I had pitched an idea to Derek about creating a sister company focused on architectural visualization. I had spent months developing the concept, creating detailed business plans, even building a portfolio of potential designs. Derek had listened patiently, asked thoughtful questions, and then told me the company wasn't ready for expansion. 2 years later, Brooks Construction launched their architectural visualization division. It became their most profitable branch. The paperwork showed that Derek had taken my entire concept, hired other designers, and built the division using my research and development work. Not only had I not been compensated, but I hadn't even been acknowledged. But that wasn't the worst part. 3 years ago, when I was going through a difficult financial period, I had asked my parents for a loan to keep my business afloat. They had refused, saying money was tight, and they couldn't risk the family's financial stability on my hobby business. I had to sell my car and move into a cramped apartment to make ends meet. The bank records showed that during that same period, my parents had given Derek a $200,000 business loan, with no interest and no repayment schedule. They had also paid for Vanessa's wedding, a $40,000 affair, and bought her and her husband a house as a wedding gift. I sat in Dad's office at 3 in the morning, surrounded by evidence of systematic favoritism and financial manipulation, feeling like my entire life had been a lie. Every time I had struggled, every time I had asked for help, and been refused, my family had been actively supporting my siblings while cutting me out. The final blow came when I found the most recent family trust documents. Dad had been updating his will throughout his illness, and the latest version showed a shocking change. The family business, the house, and all remaining assets were to be split between Derek and Vanessa. I was designated to receive a single payment of $50,000, what the document called a generous gift to help Madison establish herself independently. $50,000. After a lifetime of being part of this family, after caring for my dying father while my siblings lived their comfortable lives, I was worth $50,000 to them. I photographed every document, copied every bank statement, and saved everything to multiple cloud storage accounts. Then I did something that would have seemed unthinkable just a week earlier. I installed recording apps on my phone and started documenting every conversation with my family. Because I realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about respect, acknowledgement, and the fact that my own family had spent years treating me like an outsider while pretending to love me. Dad passed away 2 weeks later. At the funeral, Derek gave a beautiful eulogy about family values and taking care of each other. Vanessa spoke about Dad's legacy and how he had taught them the importance of fairness and integrity. I sat in the front row wearing black, holding the program and planning their downfall. The family meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Dad's funeral. Mom had called it a necessary discussion about moving forward. I knew it was actually the moment they planned to present me with the $50,000 check and explain why I was being essentially exiled from the family legacy. I spent that week preparing. Not grieving. I had done my grieving while watching Dad suffer, while realizing my family had betrayed me, while coming to terms with the fact that I had never really belonged. Instead, I prepared for war. First, I consulted with 3 different attorneys. I needed to understand my legal options, the strength of the evidence I had gathered, and the potential consequences of what I was planning. The consensus was clear. I had grounds for multiple lawsuits, including theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Second, I reached out to investigative journalists at 2 local newspapers and 1 television station. I didn't share details yet, but I planted seeds. Family construction company drama involving inheritance fraud. That was the kind of story that could generate significant public interest, especially given Brooks Construction's prominence in the community. Third, I contacted Derek's biggest business rival, a man named Marcus Thompson, who owned the largest competing construction firm in the state. Marcus and Derek had been feuding for years over contracts and market share. I made an appointment to meet with him the day after the family meeting. But most importantly, I practiced. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and rehearsed staying calm while they told me I didn't matter. I prepared for their shock when I revealed what I knew. I planned exactly how I would deliver the evidence that would destroy their perfect little scheme. Tuesday arrived gray and rainy, which felt appropriately dramatic. I drove to the family home, the house where I had grown up, where I had cared for Dad, where I had discovered their betrayal. Mom had prepared coffee and cookies as if this were a pleasant social gathering rather than a business meeting. Derek sat at the head of the dining room table, exactly where Dad used to sit. He had a folder of documents in front of him and that confident smile that had always made me feel small. Vanessa sat to his right, her legal pad ready, already acting as the family attorney. Mom bustled around playing the grieving widow who was just trying to keep the family together. Madison. Derek began, his tone patronizing and gentle. We want you to know that we've been thinking a lot about your future. I sat quietly, my phone recording in my pocket, my hands folded in my lap. Dad left specific instructions about how to handle the family assets. He continued, sliding a document across the table. He was very concerned about making sure everyone was taken care of appropriately. The document was beautifully prepared, printed on expensive paper with official-looking legal headers. It outlined the distribution of assets exactly as I had seen in Dad's files, with one addition, a paragraph explaining that the decision was made in recognition of Madison's different life path and her expressed desire for independence from family business obligations. My expressed desire for independence. They were actually claiming I had asked to be cut out. We know $50,000 might seem modest, Vanessa added, her lawyer voice in full effect, but it's designed to give you complete freedom to pursue your artistic career without any family obligations or expectations. Plus, Mom chimed in, you'll always be welcome here for holidays and family gatherings. This doesn't change the fact that you're our daughter and sister. I looked around the table at these people who had raised me, who had told me they loved me, who had spent years systematically excluding me from their lives while maintaining the facade of family unity. That's very generous, I said quietly. But I have some questions about Dad's estate. Derek's smile tightened slightly. Of course. What would you like to know? I pulled out my own folder, much thicker than his. Well, let's start with Grandma Rose's inheritance. I was wondering if you could explain why I never received my share of the $800,000 she left. The silence in the room was deafening. Derek's confident expression crumbled. Vanessa's pen stopped moving. Mom actually took a step backward. I don't know what you're talking about, Derek said, but his voice had lost all its authority. I opened my folder and began laying out bank statements, copies of the will, and transfer records. These documents show that Grandma Rose left her entire estate to be split equally among her 3 grandchildren. These bank statements show that you and Vanessa have been receiving monthly payments for 5 years. These records show that I've received nothing. Vanessa leaned forward, her lawyer instincts kicking in. Madison, you're obviously confused about... I'm not confused about anything. I interrupted, my voice remaining calm and steady. I'm also not confused about the architectural visualization division that Derek built using my research and business plans. Or the $200,000 loan you received, Derek, while I was told the family couldn't afford to help my struggling business. Or the fact that you paid for Vanessa's wedding and bought her a house while I sold my car to pay rent. I stood up and began walking around the table, placing documents in front of each of them like I was dealing cards. Here's what I find most interesting, I continued. According to these records, the family trust actually has assets worth over $2.4 million. But according to Dad's will, I'm supposed to receive $50,000 and be grateful for the generosity. Derek tried to regain control. Madison, you need to understand that business decisions... This isn't about business decisions, Derek. This is about theft. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Mom gasped. Vanessa's face went white. Derek's hands clenched into fists. You want to know what I understand? I said, my voice rising for the first time. I understand that while I was caring for our dying father, staying up all night to make sure he was comfortable managing his medications, holding his hand while he cried about leaving us while I was doing that, you were all planning to steal my inheritance and exile me from the family. We never said anything about exile, Mom protested weakly. You told me I didn't belong here anymore. You told me I never did. I turned to Derek. Those were your exact words, remember? After I confronted you about the architectural visualization theft. Derek's face was red now. You don't understand the complexities of running a business. You never did. That's why Dad made these decisions. Dad didn't make these decisions. You did. All of you. Together. I pulled out the recording device I had been using for the past 2 weeks and placed it on the table. You want to know how I know? Because I've been recording every conversation we've had since I found out about your little scheme, including the one where you all discussed how to handle the Madison problem without her making a scene at the funeral. The recording quality was crystal clear. Derek's voice filled the room. She's always been too emotional about money. If we just present it as Dad's final wish, she'll accept it and move on. She never fights back anyway. Vanessa's voice followed. The important thing is maintaining family harmony. Madison will understand eventually that this is what's best for everyone. And then Mom's voice, the words that cut deepest. She never really fit in with our goals anyway. 50,000 is more than enough for someone with her lifestyle. I watched their faces as they heard their own words played back. The shame, the anger, the realization that they had been caught not just in their actions, but in their true feelings about me. So here's what's going to happen, I said, turning off the recording and packing up my documents. You have 72 hours to transfer my legitimate inheritance, my share of Grandma's estate, my compensation for the stolen business concept, and my fair share of Dad's estate. All of it. With interest. You can't be serious, Derek sputtered. Or what? Vanessa demanded, trying to sound threatening but failing. I smiled for the first time in the meeting. Or I go to the police, the newspapers, and every client Brooks Construction has ever had. I have documented evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. I have recordings of you admitting to it. And I have a very compelling story about a grieving daughter who discovered her family had been systematically robbing her for years. I headed toward the door, then turned back for my final line. You told me I don't belong here anymore. You were right. I belong somewhere much better than this. The 72-hour deadline came and went without a single phone call from my family. I hadn't really expected them to comply. People who had been stealing for years don't suddenly develop consciences. But I had hoped that maybe somewhere deep down one of them would realize how badly they had hurt me and try to make things right. Instead, I got a call from a lawyer. Ms. Brooks, this is attorney Michael Harrison from Harrison Wells and Associates. I represent your family in this unfortunate misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. They were actually going to play it that way. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss a reasonable resolution to your concerns, he continued. My clients are committed to maintaining family harmony and addressing any confusion about estate planning decisions. I almost laughed. They thought they could lawyer their way out of documented fraud. Mr. Harrison, please inform your clients that they've had their opportunity to resolve this privately. They chose not to take it. From now on, all communication will go through my attorney. The truth was, I didn't have an attorney yet, but I was about to get the best one I could find. That afternoon, I walked into the offices of Sullivan and Kane, the most prestigious law firm in the state. They were known for taking on powerful families and corporations, and they had a reputation for winning. Sarah Kane herself agreed to meet with me after I mentioned the words, construction company embezzlement. Sarah was everything I hoped she would be: sharp, ruthless, and completely unimpressed by family loyalty when it came to criminal behavior. She reviewed my evidence for 2 hours, asking pointed questions and taking detailed notes. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of family financial abuse I've ever seen, she said finally. The documentation is excellent. The pattern is obvious, and the amounts involved make this serious felony territory. What are my chances of getting my inheritance back? 100%. The question isn't whether you'll win, it's how much additional damages you'll receive, and whether any of them end up in prison. We filed the lawsuit that Friday, but Sarah had suggested something else, something that turned out to be the key to everything that followed. Have you considered that your family has probably done this to other people? Family businesses that engage in this level of systematic fraud rarely limit it to internal victims. She was right, of course. Over the weekend, I started researching Brooks Construction's business practices, looking for patterns of the same behavior they had shown me. What I found was worse than I had imagined. The architectural visualization division that Derek had built using my work, they had stolen designs from at least 3 other small firms, claiming the work as original and patenting concepts that belonged to other people. The company's rapid expansion over the past 5 years had been built on a foundation of stolen intellectual property and fraudulent contracts. But I needed more than internet research. I needed inside information. That's when I remembered Marcus Thompson. Marcus owned Thompson Construction, Brooks's biggest competitor. The two companies had been fighting over major contracts for years, with Brooks consistently underbidding in ways that Marcus claimed were impossible if they were operating legally. I called Marcus and asked if his offer to meet was still open. His office was everything Derek would have hated: modern, sleek, with awards for ethical business practices displayed prominently on the walls. Marcus was younger than I had expected, probably mid-40s, with an energy that reminded me why I had always felt suffocated in my family's traditional business environment. "I have to admit, I was curious when you called," he said as we settled into his conference room. "The Brooks family doesn't usually reach out to me for friendly conversations." I laid out everything: the inheritance theft, the stolen business concepts, the years of systematic exclusion, and the evidence I had gathered. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I need to ask you something," he said finally. "Are you doing this just to hurt your family? Or are you genuinely interested in exposing what they've done to other people?" "Both," I answered honestly. "They destroyed my life and I want consequences for that. But if they've hurt other people, those people deserve justice too." Marcus smiled for the first time. "Good. Because I've been investigating Brooks Construction for 3 years, and I think your family's crimes go far beyond what you've discovered." He pulled out a thick folder from a locked filing cabinet. "We've documented at least 12 instances of bid manipulation, 6 cases of stolen intellectual property, and evidence of systematic tax fraud going back over a decade. The problem is, we've never had inside access to prove it. But now you do." "Now I do." Over the next 2 hours, Marcus showed me a completely different picture of my family's business. They weren't just successful, they were criminal. The stolen designs, the fraudulent contracts, the manipulated bids, it all painted a picture of a company built on systematic dishonesty. "There's something else," Marcus said as we wrapped up. "Your brother Derek has been courting several major clients for a huge commercial development project. If that goes through, Brooks Construction will double in size and become nearly untouchable in this market. When does the bidding close?" 6 weeks. "What would happen if those clients knew about the fraud?" Marcus's smile was sharp. "They'd run. No major corporation wants to be associated with a criminal enterprise." I left Marcus's office with a new understanding of what I was fighting. This wasn't just about my inheritance or my family's betrayal. This was about stopping a criminal organization that happened to be run by people who shared my DNA. But I still needed more help. That evening, I reached out to the journalists I had contacted earlier. Rebecca Morrison from the State Herald was particularly interested. She had been investigating corporate corruption for over 15 years and had a reputation for thorough, devastating reporting. "Family business fraud is always compelling," she said during our phone call. "But if this connects to larger corporate crimes, it could be a major story." "How major?" "Front page, multiple days, potential television coverage, major. Especially if we can document how the crimes affected other victims." Rebecca suggested something that hadn't occurred to me: reaching out to former employees of Brooks Construction. If the company had been engaging in systematic fraud, the employees would have seen evidence of it. The first person I contacted was James Martinez, who had worked as a project manager for Brooks for 8 years before quitting suddenly 2 years ago. When I explained who I was and what I was investigating, James was quiet for a long moment. "Are you recording this call?" he asked. "No. Do you want me to be?" "Actually, yeah. Because what I'm about to tell you could put your family in prison." James had quit Brooks Construction after discovering that Derek had been systematically overbilling clients and pocketing the difference. When James had confronted Derek about it, Derek had offered him a cut to stay quiet. When James refused, Derek had threatened to ruin his reputation in the industry. "I've been waiting 2 years for someone to take down that company," James said. "I kept copies of everything." By the end of the week, I had built a network that would have been impossible just days earlier. Sarah Kane handling the legal assault, Marcus Thompson providing business intelligence, Rebecca Morrison preparing the media campaign, and James Martinez offering insider evidence. But the most important alliance came from the most unexpected source. My father's former assistant, Patricia Wells, called me on Friday afternoon. "Madison, I need to talk to you about your father's estate documents," she said. "There are things you need to know about what happened in his final weeks." We met at a coffee shop downtown away from anywhere my family might see us. "Your father rewrote his will 3 times during his illness," Patricia told me. "The first version split everything equally among his 3 children. The second version gave you a larger share because he was grateful for your care during his illness." "What happened to those versions?" "Derek and your mother convinced him that you wouldn't be able to handle the responsibility of major assets. They told him you were too artistic, too impractical, that giving you a large inheritance would actually hurt you." The betrayal cut even deeper than I had thought possible. They hadn't just stolen from me, they had manipulated our dying father to justify it. "But here's what they don't know," Patricia continued. "Your father made me promise to give you something after his death, but only if you ever needed it." She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before his death, along with a key and an address. "Madison," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means Patricia believes you need help, and that probably means your family has done something terrible. I've suspected for years that Derek and your mother have been manipulating family finances, but I've been too sick and too tired to fight them. I'm sorry for not being stronger when you needed me to be." The address was for a storage unit across town. The letter explained that Dad had been secretly documenting his suspicions about Derek's business practices and my mother's financial manipulations. Everything was in the storage unit waiting for me. I drove to the storage facility that night, my hands shaking as I unlocked Unit 213. Inside were boxes of documents, external hard drives, and a detailed journal of everything Dad had noticed but had been too intimidated by his own family to address while alive. The most devastating discovery was a recording Dad had made just days before his death. His voice was weak but clear as he detailed how Derek and Mom had pressured him to change his will, how they had convinced him I was irresponsible, and how they had made him feel guilty for wanting to treat his children equally. "I know I'm being weak," Dad's voice said on the recording. "I know Madison deserves better than this, but I'm dying and I don't have the strength to fight my own family anymore. I just hope someday she finds this and knows that I never stopped believing in her." I sat in that storage unit until dawn, surrounded by evidence of my father's love and my family's betrayal, and I realized something important. This wasn't just about getting my inheritance back anymore. This was about honoring the father who had been too sick to fight for what was right, and making sure Derek and my mother could never intimidate another vulnerable person again. The war was about to begin in earnest. Armed with Dad's evidence and a growing network of allies, I felt invincible. Sarah Kane was preparing what she called the most airtight fraud case of her career. Marcus Thompson was ready to expose Brooks Construction's corrupt business practices to every major client. Rebecca Morrison had begun her investigation, reaching out to other victims of my family's schemes. Everything was falling into place perfectly, too perfectly. The first warning sign came during my second meeting with James Martinez. We were reviewing the financial documents he had copied during his time at Brooks Construction when his phone buzzed with a text message. "Sorry, just give me a second," he said, glancing at the screen. His face went pale. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, it's just my wife reminding me about dinner plans." But I had seen enough of the message to know it wasn't from his wife. It was from Derek. "James, who have you been talking to?" He looked up from his phone, And I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. Fear, guilt, and something else calculation. "Madison, I need to tell you something," he said slowly. "When I first agreed to help you, I thought it would be straightforward. Expose the fraud, get justice, move on. But this is bigger than either of us realized." "What do you mean?" "Brooks Construction isn't just Derek's company. There are other investors, silent partners, people with serious money and serious influence, people who don't want this kind of attention." I felt the room temperature drop. What kind of people? The kind who made it very clear that my family's safety depends on my cooperation. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. James had been feeding information back to Derek this entire time. Every document I had shared, every strategy I had discussed, every piece of evidence I had gathered, Derek had known about all of it. "How long?" I whispered. "Since the beginning. Derek contacted me the day after you called. He told me to play along, gather information about what you knew and who you were working with." "And you agreed." James's face was miserable, but his voice was steady. "They threatened my children, Madison. What would you have done?" I understood, and that made it worse. Derek had identified the weakest link in my alliance and exploited it perfectly. He had always been good at finding people's pressure points. "What did you tell them?" "Everything. Your lawyer, the journalist, your alliance with Thompson Construction. They know about the storage unit your father left. They know about the recording." I closed my eyes and tried to think. If Derek knew everything, then he had been preparing countermoves this entire time. Sarah Kane had warned me that the other side would fight back, but I hadn't expected the attack to come from within my own team. My phone rang. "Sarah Kane. Madison, we need to talk immediately. Can you come to my office?" 30 minutes later, I sat in Sarah's conference room feeling like my entire world was collapsing again. "They filed a preemptive lawsuit this morning," Sarah said, sliding a thick legal document across the table. "Your family is suing you for extortion, harassment, and defamation. They're claiming that you've been making false accusations to damage their business reputation." I scanned the document, recognizing Derek's tactical thinking in every paragraph. He had turned my accusations against me, painting himself and the family as victims of my unstable behavior following Dad's death. "It gets worse," Sarah continued. "They've also filed for a restraining order claiming you've been stalking family members and making threats. If granted, you won't be able to contact them, approach their business, or continue any public accusations." Can they do that? With all the evidence we have? They're not addressing the evidence directly. Instead, they're attacking your credibility and your motives. They're claiming you're an emotionally unstable person trying to exploit your family's grief for financial gain. The legal papers included character references from family friends, employees who swore Derek had never engaged in any fraudulent practices, and most devastatingly, a psychiatric evaluation that my mother had apparently convinced our family doctor to provide, suggesting that my accusations were the result of a grief-induced, delusional episode. "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "The journalist you were working with, Rebecca Morrison, she called this morning to say she's been taken off the story. Her editor received pressure from Brooks Construction's advertising department. Apparently, they spend a significant amount on newspaper ads." I felt like I was drowning. Derek had systematically dismantled everything I had built in just a few days. And Marcus Thompson... I don't know yet, but given how thorough they've been with everything else... My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "We need to talk, not over the phone." I met Marcus at a small diner outside town, somewhere Derek wouldn't think to look for us. One look at his face told me I wasn't going to like what he had to say. "They made me an offer I couldn't refuse," he said without preamble. "What kind of offer?" "A merger. Thompson Construction becomes a subsidiary of Brooks Construction. I keep my name on the company, maintain operational control, but they become the majority shareholder. And in exchange, I stop helping you." I provide them with copies of everything you shared with me, and I sign a confidentiality agreement that prevents me from ever discussing Brooks Construction's business practices. I stared at him across the table. You're taking it. Madison, they're offering me $12 million and a guaranteed future in this industry. If I don't take it, they'll use their influence to make sure Thompson Construction never gets another major contract. They'll destroy my business and my employees' livelihoods. Another pressure point. Derek had figured out exactly what mattered most to each person in my alliance and had targeted those things specifically. Besides, Marcus added, without the journalist and without the inside employee testimony, your case isn't strong enough to take them down anyway. They've neutralized your media strategy and discredited your evidence. Even if you win the inheritance lawsuit, the criminal fraud charges will never stick. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes of evidence that suddenly felt worthless. My family hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had systematically destroyed every ally I had managed to gather, every strategy I had developed, every hope I had for justice. Derek had taught me a lesson about power that I should have learned years ago. He didn't just play to win, he played to make sure his opponents could never play again. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized something that Derek had forgotten about his little sister. I had always been underestimated. By him, by my family, by everyone who had ever dismissed me as too artistic, too emotional, too naive to understand how the real world worked. Derek thought he had won. He thought he had crushed me completely. He had no idea what I was capable of when I stopped playing by the rules of family loyalty and started playing by the rules of war. The next morning, I did something that went against every instinct I had developed over 30 years of being the good daughter. I stopped trying to prove I deserved better treatment, and I started focusing on what I could take. Derek thought he had neutralized all my allies, but he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated Patricia Wells. Patricia called me at 6 a.m. Madison, I've been thinking about our conversation, and there's something else your father wanted you to have. Something he made me promise to keep secret unless you were in real trouble. We met at the storage unit again, but this time Patricia brought her own key. Your father rented 2 units, she explained as we walked to Unit 214. He told me the second one was for emergency evidence only if the family ever tried to completely destroy you. Inside the second unit was a revelation that changed everything. Dad hadn't just been documenting his suspicions about Derek's business practices. He had been conducting a full investigation, complete with surveillance equipment, financial forensics, and professional-grade evidence collection. Your father was an engineer before he became a businessman, Patricia explained as we looked through boxes of meticulously organized files. When he suspected something was wrong, he approached it like a technical problem to be solved. The evidence was overwhelming. Dad had documented everything: the stolen designs, the fraudulent contracts, the manipulated bids, and most importantly, the money trail that showed exactly where all the stolen funds had gone. But the most devastating discovery was a series of recorded conversations that Dad had secretly captured using professional surveillance equipment. Hours of Derek, Vanessa, and Mom discussing their plans to exclude me from the family assets, manipulate Dad's will, and cover up their years of financial fraud. The old man is getting suspicious, Derek's voice said clearly on one recording. We need to move faster on changing the will before he starts asking too many questions. What about Madison? Vanessa's voice replied. She's been spending a lot of time in his office. Madison's not smart enough to figure anything out, Mom's voice answered. She never pays attention to business matters anyway. But the recording that made me actually gasp was from just 2 weeks before Dad's death. I feel terrible about what we're doing to Madison, Dad's weak voice said. You need to stop thinking about fairness and start thinking about reality, Derek responded harshly. Madison has never contributed anything meaningful to this family's success. Giving her an equal share would be throwing money away. She's been taking care of me, Dad protested, because she doesn't have anything better to do. It's not like she has a real career or real responsibilities. But she's my daughter. And we're your son and daughter too, Vanessa interrupted. The ones who actually understand business, who can actually protect the family legacy. Do you want your life's work destroyed because you felt sentimental about the daughter who never lived up to her potential? I had to stop the recording and sit down. Hearing them manipulate my dying father, convincing him that I was worthless while I was literally in the next room caring for him, was worse than any financial theft. But Dad had been recording them for a reason. The final recording was Dad alone speaking directly to the surveillance equipment just 3 days before his death. Madison, if you're hearing this, it means they went through with it. It means they convinced me to betray you, and I'm sorry. I should have been stronger. I should have protected you better. His voice was barely a whisper, but every word was clear. Everything in these units belongs to you now. Use it. Make them face consequences for what they've done. Don't let them win. Patricia was crying quietly as we listened to Dad's final message. When it ended, she handed me another envelope. One more thing. Your father asked me to give you this if you ever decided to fight back. Inside was a bank account number and a letter from Dad explaining that he had been secretly moving money out of the family accounts for months, creating an emergency fund that Derek and Mom didn't know about. $400,000 that he had hidden specifically for me to use if I ever needed to fight the family in court. He knew they would try to destroy you financially, Patricia explained. This was his insurance policy. With Dad's evidence and his secret fund, I suddenly had resources that Derek couldn't touch. But more importantly, I had something else, a new ally that Derek would never see coming. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from someone I hadn't thought about in years, my cousin Rachel. Rachel was Derek's age, the daughter of Dad's brother, who had died in a car accident 15 years earlier. She had inherited her father's portion of the original family business, but had sold her shares to Derek when she moved to California to pursue a career in tech. Madison, I've been following the lawsuit online, Rachel said without preamble. I think we need to talk. We met that evening at a restaurant downtown, and Rachel got straight to the point. When I sold my shares to Derek 15 years ago, I signed a non-compete agreement that prevented me from challenging any Brooks construction business practices. But there's a clause in that agreement that voids it if the company is found to have engaged in systematic fraud. What does that mean? It means if you can prove Derek committed fraud, I can reclaim my original shares in the company, and those shares calculated at today's value would be worth about $8 million. Rachel smiled grimly. Derek stole from me too, Madison. He just did it legally. When I wanted to sell, he had the company's assets appraised at artificially low values. I sold my third of the business for $2 million. If I had known what it was really worth, I would have demanded at least $6 million. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've built a successful tech company, and I have resources Derek doesn't know about. I can fund your legal battle, provide technical expertise to analyze the financial evidence, and most importantly, I know where Derek hides his real assets. Rachel pulled out a tablet and showed me a detailed financial analysis she had been working on. Derek doesn't keep his stolen money in the family business accounts. He's been laundering it through a series of shell corporations and offshore investments. I've been tracking those investments for years, waiting for the right moment to expose them. Why didn't you do something sooner? Because I needed someone with legal standing to challenge the fraud. I sold my shares voluntarily, so I can't claim theft. But you can. And once you expose the systematic fraud, my non-compete agreement becomes void, and I can reclaim what's rightfully mine. Rachel's resources were exactly what I needed. She had forensic accountants who could trace every fraudulent transaction, private investigators who could document Derek's offshore accounts, and most importantly, the technical expertise to present the evidence in a way that courts and media outlets couldn't ignore. But she brought something else even more valuable, a deep personal understanding of Derek's methods and motivations. Derek thinks he's smarter than everyone else, Rachel explained. But his arrogance is also his weakness. He's documented everything because he never thought anyone would be capable of challenging him. Every fraudulent transaction, every stolen design, every manipulated contract. It's all recorded somewhere because Derek believes he's untouchable. Within 48 hours, Rachel's team had traced Derek's financial crimes back over 12 years and identified over $3 million in stolen and laundered funds. They had also discovered something that even I hadn't known about. Derek had been embezzling from the company's employee retirement fund. 23 employees had been contributing to retirement accounts that Derek had been systematically draining to fund his personal investments. These weren't just financial crimes anymore. They were crimes that had destroyed the futures of working families. "This changes everything," Sarah Kane said when we presented the new evidence. "We're not just talking about inheritance disputes anymore. We're talking about federal crimes, tax evasion, and systematic theft from employee retirement funds. Derek is looking at serious prison time." But the most satisfying discovery came when Rachel's investigators uncovered Derek's most recent financial activities. In the weeks since our confrontation at the family meeting, Derek had been frantically moving money, trying to hide assets in preparation for my lawsuit. But every transaction had been documented, and every attempted concealment was itself a federal crime. "He's actually making his situation worse," Sarah explained. "Every asset he tries to hide now is evidence of criminal intent. He's turning a civil lawsuit into a criminal prosecution." For the first time since this entire nightmare began, I felt like I was winning. Derek thought he had destroyed my alliance, but he had underestimated the power of people who had been waiting years for the chance to take him down. More importantly, he had underestimated me. I wasn't the naive little sister anymore. I was a woman with resources, evidence, and allies who understood exactly how dangerous Derek really was. The war was about to reach its final phase. The end came faster than anyone expected, including Derek. Sarah Kane filed the amended lawsuit on a Friday morning, complete with Rachel's financial evidence, Dad's surveillance recordings, and documentation of Derek's recent attempts to hide assets. By Friday afternoon, the FBI had opened a federal investigation into Brooks Construction's business practices. Derek's lawyer called for an emergency meeting that same day. "My clients are prepared to discuss a settlement," Michael Harrison said, but his confident tone from weeks earlier had been replaced by obvious panic. "What kind of settlement?" Sarah asked coolly. "Full restitution for any disputed inheritance amounts, plus a formal apology for any misunderstanding about family financial matters." I almost laughed. After everything they had done, Derek thought he could still control the narrative by calling it a misunderstanding. "Counteroffer," Sarah said. "Complete restitution of all stolen funds with interest, public admission of fraud. Derek's resignation from Brooks Construction and full cooperation with the federal investigation. In exchange, we'll recommend reduced criminal charges." "That's completely unreasonable," Harrison protested. "Then we'll see you in court," Sarah replied. "Though I should mention the FBI raid of your client's offices is scheduled for Monday morning." The raid never happened because Derek broke Sunday night. I was at home reviewing evidence for the court proceedings that were supposed to begin Tuesday morning when my phone rang. It was Derek. "Madison, we need to talk. Through our lawyers. Please, just 5 minutes. I'll come to you." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my apartment. Derek arrived looking like he had aged 10 years in the past month. Gone was the confident businessman who had told me I didn't belong in the family. This was a desperate man who had finally realized he had pushed too far. "I underestimated you," he said without preamble. "Yes, you did. Mom wants to fight this to the end. She thinks we can discredit you and make it all go away. But I've seen the evidence you have. I know what we're facing." Derek leaned forward across the table. "The federal investigation will destroy everything Dad built. Not just me, everyone. The employees, the clients, the community projects we fund. Is that really what you want?" It was a last-ditch manipulation attempt trying to make me feel guilty for the consequences of his crimes. "What I want," I said carefully, "is for you to face appropriate consequences for what you've done. Not just to me, to the employees whose retirement funds you stole, to the small businesses whose designs you copied to Dad, who died thinking he had betrayed me." What would appropriate consequences look like? For the first time in our entire relationship, Derek was asking me what I wanted instead of telling me what I should want. Complete financial restitution to everyone you've stolen from. Public acknowledgement of the crimes. Your permanent removal from the business. And a guarantee that you'll never be in a position to hurt anyone else like this again. Derek was quiet for a long moment. If I agree to all of that, would you be willing to make a statement that you believe I've learned from this and that prison time wouldn't serve anyone's interests? That depends on whether you actually seem to have learned anything. I've learned that you're not the person I thought you were, he said quietly. I spent so many years thinking you were weak because you chose art over business, kindness over profit. But you're not weak. You're just not cruel. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to self-awareness I had ever heard from Derek. I'll consider it, I said. But it has to be everything. Full restitution, complete transparency, and you walk away from the business permanently. Monday morning, instead of an FBI raid, there was a press conference. Derek, flanked by his lawyer and Sarah Kane, read a prepared statement admitting to years of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and theft. He announced his immediate resignation from Brooks Construction and his commitment to making full financial restitution to all victims of his crimes. The local news coverage was extensive. Rebecca Morrison, who had been removed from the story at her original newspaper, had taken the evidence to a television station instead. Her investigative piece ran for 3 consecutive nights, detailing not just Derek's crimes, but the broader pattern of family business corruption that hurt working families. The financial restitution was more than I had ever imagined possible. Beyond my original inheritance, I received compensation for the stolen business concepts, damages for emotional distress, and interest on everything that had been taken. The total amount was just over $1.8 million. But the money wasn't the most important part. Rachel successfully voided her non-compete agreement and reclaimed her shares in Brooks Construction. With Derek gone, she took over management of the company and immediately implemented ethical business practices, employee profit sharing, and transparent financial reporting. The 23 employees whose retirement funds Derek had stolen received full restitution, plus additional compensation for lost investment opportunities. Several of them wrote to thank me for exposing the theft they hadn't even known about. The small businesses whose designs Derek had stolen received financial settlements and public acknowledgement of their original work. 3 of them hired me to help with their legal graphic design needs, giving me more business than my little company had ever handled. Mom and Vanessa escaped criminal charges by cooperating fully with the investigation and providing testimony about Derek's leadership role in the fraud. But their relationship with me was permanently severed. They had made their choice years ago, and they would have to live with the consequences. 6 months after the press conference, I used part of my settlement money to buy a house with a large art studio. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was completely mine, filled with my work, my choices, my vision for what life could be. Rachel and I discovered that we actually enjoyed each other's company beyond our shared interest in bringing Derek down. She introduced me to her network of successful women and business people who valued creativity and ethics over pure profit. For the first time, I had a professional community that appreciated my strengths instead of dismissing them. Patricia Wells became something like an honorary aunt, someone who had known Dad's true feelings and could share stories about his pride in my artistic achievements that the family had never acknowledged. The investigation into Brooks Construction led to broader changes in industry oversight and employee protection. The story became a case study in business schools about the long-term costs of ethical failures. But the most important change was personal. I learned that I had never been too sensitive, too artistic, or too naive for the business world. I had simply been trapped in a family system that benefited from my silence and compliance. When I stopped trying to earn their approval and started demanding justice, I discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Derek was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison and 10 years of probation. During his sentencing hearing, he made a statement acknowledging the harm he had caused and expressing what seemed like genuine remorse for his actions. I attended the hearing not to gloat, but to close this chapter of my life definitively. After the sentencing, I walked out of that courthouse knowing that the little girl who had spent 30 years trying to belong in a family that didn't value her was finally gone. In her place was a woman who had built her own family, her own success, and her own understanding of what justice looked like. The Brooks family name still exists, but it means something completely different now. Under Rachel's leadership, the construction company has become known for ethical practices, community investment, and respect for employees. The family that had been built on exploitation and manipulation has been transformed into something that actually serves the community. As for me, I kept Dad's letter in a frame in my studio next to a photo of us from when I was 7 years old, and still believe that family meant unconditional love and support. The letter reminds me that even when the people who raised you fail to protect you, it's never too late to protect yourself. And that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to accept being treated badly even by family. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered that family members were working against you behind your scenes? How did you handle finding out that people you trusted had betrayed that trust? Drop your experiences in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help other people realize they're not alone in these situations. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories where justice actually gets served. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes walking away from toxic family dynamics isn't giving up. It's growing up. Thank you for watching, and remember, blood doesn't determine family. Loyalty, respect, and genuine care determine family. Choose wisely who you give those precious things to and never be afraid to demand them in return.